G'day and welcome to another episode of Grumpy Old Bloke, the Vinyl Collection. Today, after Black Sabbath and David Bowie and the Beatles, we're moving on to the letter C. And C is not a letter that's heavily represented in my record collection. So I have a handful of albums to go through with you today, all with bands beginning with the letter C. As I've mentioned before, a large number of the bands that I have collected over the years, I have their complete collections on CD, if not on vinyl. And today there's quite a few examples of those that I have a few vinyl versions, but predominantly collections are on CD. The first band that we're going to look at today is a band that I became aware of in the late 70s, probably around about 1978. Songs such as My Best Friend's Girl, Let the Good Times Roll, and Just What I Needed. And the Cars are a band that perked my interest straight away. They're being a little bit different to a lot of the music that was around at the time. They're sort of electronically poppy, but with a rock edge. I wouldn't really call them AOR, but they were sort of leaning in that direction. So a lot of the early Cars stuff I was listening to, but I didn't purchase. I believe I've got some of their stuff on CD, but as far as the vinyl's concerned, I sort of came to that a little bit later. And at the moment, I only have one album by the Cars, and that is this one, Heartbeat City. This is their fifth album and came out in 1984. It was the first Cars album which was not produced by Roy Thomas Baker. What Roy Thomas Baker was working on at the time, I can't be sure, because it seems to be the only year that he didn't actually bring anything out. But anyway, this was produced by Mutt Lange, who nearly missed out on doing Def Leppard's Hysteria as a result of doing this album, because he's already committed to this, but due to delays in the making of the Def Leppard album, he managed to be able to do both. So this is a Mutt Lange production. Heartbeat City is one of the, for me anyway, the three must-have Car albums. The first one being The Cars, the second one being Candy-O. After that, the third and fourth album, Panorama and Shake It Up, were a little bit hit and miss, wasn't too sure, but this was a good return to form. This particular version is a gatefold sleeve, albeit a single album, and I'll show you the back cover in full. There we are. The inner sleeve comes with lyric sheets, and just a piece of machinery on the back there, and the album is on Elektra. There we go. Electra labels. As far as the track listing is concerned, you won't be able to see it on here, but it contains, everyone knows, track Drive, for obvious reasons. I'm not going to go into that now. It also contains You Might Think, which got a lot of airplay on MTV when MTV was really first out. It's one of the big videos that they really launched with. And Why Can't I Have You? So they're probably the three tracks that most people would know off this album. I do intend to buy the first two albums as well when I come across them in record fairs or whatever. But there you go, 1984, The Cars. The next album we're going to have a look at actually has a link with the previous band that we looked at, The Cars. The first, at least I believe, the first person to play it on stage in London was The Next Artist. And that's certainly where I heard it. This is Tracy Chapman. Now, as I say, the first time I'd ever heard of her was when she was playing at Live Aid. She was playing from memory with just herself and a guitar. I don't believe she had a band. And I was so captivated by it, I actually went out and bought this album the next day. Not my usual style of music. Those of you who don't know Tracy Chapman, I'm surprised to be many of you, but a very soulful, folky, almost bare pared down gospel sort of feel to her music. Absolutely beautiful performed, beautiful singing. This particular album, as I say, is from New, just the UK version. Track listing on the back. There we are. And the inner cover, again, it's another picture of Tracy with the lyric list on the back there. And like the last album, this is also an Elektra label, which you don't see that often in the UK. I have to say, it tends to be more an American pressing, but this is definitely I bought it in Britain, put it that way, brand new from the shop, so I'm assuming it's a British pressing. So look, Tracy Chapman, again, not something that I listen to very often, but whenever I do hear it in the background or on the radio or anything like that, I go, oh yeah, and connect with it immediately. So brings back really vivid memories of Live Aid for me. And she went on to have an amazing career, multi-platinum, selling multiple albums, and done extremely well for herself on her own terms, and I really respect that. The late 70s and to some degree, the early 80s was a fantastic time for live albums, when really, I think, in order to make it, you had to be able to cut it live. The studio just simply wasn't enough. And one band which is a real testament to this was a band that had been around for a few years and knocking about doing, low-grade gigs and stuff like that, but never really caught on until they released an album live in Japan. That album was this, Cheap Trick, live at Budokan. This album was groundbreaking because it was originally only supposed to be a Japanese-only release, but it started getting so much airplay in America from bootlegs that they decided to release it worldwide as an official release. So this album was live in 1978. There's the back as well. The track listing, now this varies, I think you can probably see it on there. Probably not. The track listing varies enormously. There have been quite a few different versions of this released over the years. This is like the highlights of the concert. There has actually been other versions released predominantly on CD and DVD to some extent of the whole gig, reproduced and remixed and everything else. This is the original version. And as I say, I bought this when it came out in the UK. I'd never heard of Cheap Trick before until I heard this album. And the one track on there, of course, that got radio play was I Want You to Want Me. The album itself comes on translucent yellow vinyl, which I absolutely adore. And to this day, this is one of my favourite records in my collection, mainly because of the yellow vinyl, I think, but also it is an absolutely brilliant album from a live gig perspective. This also comes with the I think this is a reproduction of the program for the tour in Japan. Obviously, it's very difficult for me to go through, but it is in Japanese predominantly, so I can't really help you in this. Any of you can read Japanese, let's put it that distance. So what else about this album? Interestingly enough, whilst it says live in Budokan, there's the kamikaze yellow vinyl sticker that goes on the front of the album. The album was actually recorded in Osaka, not in Budokan, because the Budokan recordings apparently weren't considered to be of good enough quality in order to be able to put out on record. But this is from the same tour. It was a couple of nights earlier or later, I don't know which, but represents them on that tour fantastically. I suppose at the time, live in Osaka didn't have the same ring. Budokan is one of those places that a lot of big bands have played, and it's sort of one of those what would you say, gold tip venues where everyone likes to say Budokan. So like Madison Square Gardens or Wembley Stadium or something like that. Anyway, brilliant album, and as a result of that, I thought, okay, what I'll do is buy the next album which comes out, which is by Cheap Trick, called Dream Police. Now this came out the following year, so 1979, and is a follow-up to the live album. So this comes on a gatefold sleeve, line up inside, and track listing, track listing on the back. There we are, it's the back cover. The inner sleeve comes with the obligatory lyrics and rather dodgy uniforms there, boys. I'm not too sure what you were thinking. And it's on the Epic label, so just a classic Epic label. On buying this album, it's okay. I liked it, but I didn't like it enough to decide to go back and start collecting all of their stuff on back catalogue. Now, how would you describe Cheap Trick? Probably they were poppy enough to appeal to the masses. They had enough rock and edge in there to appeal to the rockers. They're a little bit AOR. So I think they sort of hit at just the right moment. They hit on a number of possible genres that would attract a bigger crowd. Now they've pretty much got a core audience. In America they're huge. They're sort of up there, sort of Aerosmithy sort of level. But in the rest of the world they never really caught on. Rick Nielsen is a brilliant guitarist, and what can you say? They're just a really good, solid performance. They're big fans of the Beatles. They've covered Sgt. Pepper, I believe, in the past, and are known to do some Beatles stuff live as well. But having said that, I'd rather they stuck to doing Cheap Trick stuff. So there you go, Dream Police and Live at Budokan. Live at Budokan, I would argue, is one of the greatest live albums. Brilliant. Changing styles a little bit, we move into 1987 and a Liverpool band that I don't know if they're still around, if they're still recording, to be honest, but this is their first album, the only album I own by them, The Christians. So called because the three brothers that originally formed the band surname was Christian, and the fourth member of the band, who remained with the band, his middle name was Christian, so they don't know anything to do with it, I don't know, but there you go, the Christians. As I say, they were a Liverpool band, and I suppose if you were to encompass their style, you'd probably call it sort of early northern soul. Would probably go on to influence bands like The Verve. That's my take on it anyway. Very heavily vocal harmonies led, quite soulful sound, really what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost sort of Sade-ish in its style as well, I would suggest, if that gives you some indication. The track listing is on the back. There were 5 singles in the UK at least taken from this album, and it only reached number 2 in the album charts. No idea how that happened, but it comes as a gatefold presentation. And in the absence of an inner sleeve of any note, all the liner notes and everything are on the inside of the sleeve, and it's on Island Records, and I believe it was one of the biggest debuts, certainly, that Island Records ever had. It's a really lovely album. Again, it's not an album I come back to very often, but it's really nice to have in the fact that it's so diverse and so different to listen to. It's very good Sunday morning listening, I guess you'd call it. But if you like that whole sort of soulful, early northern soul, that sort of harmonic singing, really good album to listen to. Now, this next band, this album technically isn't an album, so I'm lying. It's a 12-incher, but it's a particularly special one. It's Cinderella, Gypsy Road. This comes, as I say, it's a 3-track EP. Picture of the boys inside, and track listing on the back. The reason I bought this album is because of the live version of Save Me, which is on the back. I wasn't a huge fan of Cinderella particularly, but Tom Kiefer's voice is, seriously, it's like he'd gargled on razor blades. Absolutely incredibly powerful and rough voice. The other bonus of this is it comes on white vinyl, which is rather nice, I have to say. It's very, very pretty. Somebody Save Me live, from the outside live, which is the main reason I bought it. Unfortunately, Cinderella were one of those bands that didn't last all that long. They were very, very good, very, very talented. I actually saw them live. I'm trying to remember where I saw them, but I saw them live a couple of times. Brilliant performance, really good gigs, but the classic Spinal Tap, continual lineup changes and internal friction, unfortunately meant the band just never really held it together with one lineup long enough to really crack the market. So they're one of those bands that are underrated. There are plenty of other bands from this period, hair metal especially. They weren't really hair metal, but they looked it but didn't sound it. They're one of those bands that were probably overlooked. The Clash formed in 1976 amid the first movement of British punk, alongside the Sex Pistols and various other bands. There was so many bands around at that time. The Clash were considered one of the big 3, and I have to say I've never been a huge Clash fan. I know this is heresy to say, but when The Clash came out, I very much liked some of their singles, but as far as the whole album's concerned, at the time I didn't have the sort of money to spend on albums that I wasn't 100% committed to. So these 2 albums are later purchases. The first, Give 'Em Enough Rope, originally released in 1977. This is their second studio album. On the back it consists of the track Tommy Gun and English Civil War, which were tracks that sort of attracted me to The Clash in the first place. I actually do have the original singles of those 2. The album itself is not that interesting. It's just a single cover, no gatefold, no inserts, nothing of any particular interest, and it's on the CBS label. Personally, that's my favourite Clash album. I like Give 'Em Enough Rope. It's my favourite of the 3, and After London's Burning I didn't follow The Clash at all, to be honest with you. London's Burning, of course, has been touted as one of the greatest albums ever released. Has come top in a number of polls for most influential. How would you describe it? Well, it's not really a punk album at this point. It's The Clash were ostensibly started as a punk band, but they were playing reggae and dub and hip hop and all sorts of other different styles, ska, all that sort of stuff as well. So this is quite a mixed album. It has all sorts of different styles on it, and that's probably why it's been touted as one of the great ones, because it is so diverse. The track listing on the back, there we are. This is an Australian release. I think this particular version was released in 1980. It's on a Blue Epic label. Well, both of them are Blue Epic label. It's one of those frustrating albums, which is a double album, but this version anyway comes in a single sleeve. And as far as the inserts are concerned, there we are, they're all the lyrics from the songs. There we go again. Okay, this is where I get contentious. As I've already said, The Clash were not my favourite band of this era. My favourite band we will come to later in the alphabet. For me, this is too diverse. It doesn't sit as a contiguous album. It's all over the place. It's very difficult to actually get into any kind of groove with it. I also find a lot of it is just filler. I think it should have been a single album, and they should have cut back on an awful lot of the stuff that was just, I don't know why it was even on there. Some of this stuff just doesn't seem to fit with The Clash at all. I do love the album cover, of course. This is a little bit of a hybrid. Paul Simonon smashing his bass. I don't know where that was taken, but I'm sure real Clash fans out there will. And also the colour and the lettering on the side it's an interpretation of Elvis Presley's first album, which I thought that was quite artistically done. Now, so The Clash, not a huge fan, and as such for me this album is way overrated. It's an important album, certainly. It's certainly influential, and showed that punk bands were more than just three-chord shouties. But it just never really clicked for me. I'm sorry. Well, no, I'm not sorry, actually. It just never really clicked for me. So if you are a Clash fan and think there's anything I should listen to other than on these two albums that would make me change my mind, I'm open for it. But in all these years, I've not really heard anything. Very different change in style now. I've got absolutely no idea why I've even got this album. But it's Clummy Fisher. It was 1987, there you go. So I'd have to check back through my diary and find out what I was doing in 1987. I have a feeling this may have been to impress a girl, or maybe it was hers. I have no idea. But the only thing I can remember about this is two tracks. The first two tracks on the album, Love Changes Everything and Rise to the Occasion, were both singles, which got a reasonable coverage. I think they won a couple of awards, Single of the Year or something like that. Don't know a great deal about the musicians either. I know they were both session musicians in Abbey Road Studios, I believe, where they played all sorts of stuff for all sorts of people. I know they also wrote for other people, including I think George Michael, I think they worked with Derek Trucks, and Doobie Brothers, maybe. I could be making that up. I think one of them wrote a song for Rick Astley as well. So those are the singer-songwriter producers more than artists themselves. Anyway, that's an album that I own, so I'm showing it to you. Here's the inner sleeve on the other side. The album itself is on, I think it's on black EMI, yeah, standard black EMI label. There you go, for anyone that's complaining. I'm not touching the grooves, alright? So there you go. There's not really much I can say about this album, so I'm really not sure why it's in my collection at all. It's really not something I would normally buy, so I don't know, maybe I was drunk. I don't know, can't remember. But there you go, Clummy Fisher. The late 70s and early 80s saw a lot of bands slip under the radar with the advent of punk and new wave punk, new wave of British heavy metal. Everything was sort of happening at that time. Glam metal, I suppose, hair metal, everything was kicking off around about the same time. And as a result of that, a number of bands slipped under the radar. And for me, this was one of those. This is Coney Hatch. They were formed in Canada. Funnily enough, not my favourite Canadian band, but we will come to them at some point. A four-piece band. They released 3 albums in the 80s, and they reformed and produced another one in 2013, I think it was. I haven't even heard that. But this is their second album. Their first album's a little bit heavier, a bit harder rocking. This one's a little bit more polished, a little bit more AOR-y, I suppose, if you want to call it that. It's a good, solid rock album, I have to say. But again, as with all bands of this sort of age, they sort of just fell apart. Musical differences or whatever it was, they just never really made it big. I did see them live. I was trying to remember where I saw them live. Reason to believe I saw them support Iron Maiden on the World Peace Tour. But when I actually looked at the venue where I would have probably seen them, they seemed supported by Grand Prix. So maybe I didn't. The other option is I may have heard a couple of the tracks on the Friday Rock Show, Tommy Vance's Friday Rock Show, and thought, oh, that sounds quite good, and grabbed it. So no real sort of attachment to this album. Don't Say Make Me is the opening track on the album, and certainly my favourite. There we go. The inner sleeve is obligatory lyric sheets, and a picture of, well, they look like they're 14 years old on there to me, but there we go. And the label itself is on, yeah, it's on a Vertigo album. There you go. So this is Out of Hand. As I said, this is their second album. Came out in 1982, I think. I'll check that for you. 1983. I was close. That wasn't bad for an old man whose memory's going. After the 80s, after their big three albums, their first three albums in the 80s, they went through a number of lineup changes, which is probably why, to a large extent, they fell apart, because no band really survives extensive lineup changes. However, just a matter of interest, one of the singers that was with Coney Hatch during that period was Kevin James Labrie, who obviously dropped the Kevin name for some reason. Who'd have thought? Because I think it's a fabulous name, and stuck with James Labrie and joined a little known band called Dream Theater, which I'm fairly confident we will be coming across soon when we reach the D part of my record collection. So anyway, little known fact for you. The early 1970s saw the birth of another heavy rock, heavy metal icon, and the guy is still around today in various forms, still doing his thing when he's not out on the golf course. That, of course, is Alice Cooper, Vince Furnier, to those of you who don't know. I've got two albums by Alice Cooper. I have both of whom are Australian copies, reprints. This is the original, this is the Australian original version of School's Out. It is the desk, what would you call it, the desk opening up style cover, which I don't know that all of them actually came in. It doesn't have the panties inside though. For those of you who know, the original album, the American album, came out wrapped in a pair of paper panties. And the reason they stopped doing that after a while, because apparently the panties were flammable. I'm not going to say any more than that. Title track off the album is School's Out. Most of the other tracks on here, I'm not really a big Alice Cooper fan. I bought this out of old time's sake, to be honest with you, because I love the cover. It is a classic album in the fact that, you know, School's Out, 1972. I was a school kid myself. I mean, it's very rebellious, but to me, I thought Alice was a one-hit wonder until obviously he's still going nowadays. So I really hadn't collected Alice Cooper or taken much notice of him. I also have a copy of Alice Goes to Hell. I bought this at a record fair recently. I saw it and thought, well, you know, probably deserve me getting a few of his back catalogue and giving them a listen to. But on listening to this again, I wasn't particularly over impressed with it either. A little bit too light on for me. I think it's a little bit more style over substance for me for Alice Cooper. I mean, the guy's an absolute legend. What can you say? The fact that he's still putting on the shock rock shows into this day, and he probably was the pioneer of all of it. Just another label for you. And he was the pioneer of all of that, and I totally admire the guy for it. Just musically, it doesn't speak to me. I must admit, when he released Poison, I thought that was a really, really good track. And recently I heard Brutal Planet, which I thought, yeah, okay, I like that. That's really, really good. So, now Alice does it for me now and again. He plays the occasional track that I really like, but his albums, generally speaking, they don't really grab me. They're a little bit too light on as a general prospect. As I said, I think they're a little bit more style over substance. Although there's no denying the man is an absolute legend and will remain in rock and roll history forever. Finally, in the C section of my record collection, a band that I absolutely love. They were formed in the very early 80s and performed under a number of different names until they eventually decided on The Cult. The Cult's first album, Dreamtime, was released in 1984, and for me it was a little bit too, gothy is the wrong word, it was a little bit too airy-fairy, a little bit too hippie and psyche for me. But the second album, which was released in 1985, Love, is an absolute goth classic. For me, this and Floodland, probably by Sisters of Mercy, are the archetypal goth albums. So if you ever want to know what goth is all about, this is the one to listen to. So this particular version is the British original release on the gatefold sleeve, including all the boys inside. Track listing on the back, which is virtually impossible to read in this format, I'm sure you'll agree. The inner cover is, again, with track listing and liner notes and lyrics. The album itself is on Beggar's Banquet. There we go. This album was groundbreaking at the time. There were a lot of bands around that time playing a similar sort of style of music. Joy Division, obviously the Worst and Bauhaus, The Mission, those sorts of bands. But for me, The Cult really cut through. And The Cult have 3 albums in a row, which is interesting because a lot of bands for me have 3 albums when they're at their absolute peak. the Cult are one of those bands, but the 3 albums in a row successively in 85, 87, 89 all had a slightly different theme to them for me. So that actually made them a little bit more interesting, and you can see the growth of the band. Anyway, love this particular album. For tracks on here for me are the track Love itself. Rain is an absolute classic. She Sells Sanctuary, many of you will have heard, and Revolution. They're the big standout tracks on this album. It's an absolute classic. It's a beautiful album, and this is beautifully presented, and if they bring out a anniversary special, then this is one that I will absolutely buy. In 1986, the Cult went about recording their follow-up to Love, in which an album was completely recorded with the original producer, Steve Brown. These recordings were to be known as Peace, an album called Peace. But on completing it, they decided they really didn't like the sound of it very much and wanted to try something a little bit different. So they got a new producer, that being Rick Rubin, who is now very, very well known for a number of his works. But at the time, he was known more of a hip-hop producer, but had also produced Slayer. So he had a little bit of rock and roll cred, but nonetheless, he was drafted in to re-record the songs, produce them in a slightly different way, and put them in a different order. And sure enough, in 1997, Electric was released. This is another one of those albums you simply have to have. It's an absolute classic album. Those of us who love the Cult, after calling their second album, Love, the goth album, this is known as the AC/DC album. So if you like AC/DC, Highway to Hell, Back in Black, that sort of period, you're going to love this. So again, recorded in Oxfordshire, this one. The last one was recorded in Surrey, which is interesting for boys from Bradford, the recording down south. But anyway, this is the British version. It comes with a gatefold sleeve, again, albeit a single album. Track listing, I don't know if you can see on the back there, but I'll read the ones to you. Wildflowers releases a single, Peace Dog, Little Devil, Aphrodisiac Jacket, Electric Ocean, Bad Fun, King Countryman, Love Removal Machine, which is one of the big singles, Born to Be Wild, yes, that song, Outlaw, and Memphis Hip Shake. Absolutely great sounding rock and roll raw album. Not at all what we expected from the Cult, who were sort of a dark, moody, arty band before this, but they sort of became a rock band during this period. I saw them touring this album as well, and indeed the subsequent album at Wembley, and they were absolutely fantastic. The album itself is on Virgin here, and the inner sleeve containing lyrics and liner notes as per usual. So a stark change from their previous album, but an absolute must in any rock collection. So if Electric was the AC/DC album, in 1989 the Cult brought in Bob Rock, producer extraordinaire, and moved to Canada to record their 4th studio album, their Led Zeppelin album if you like, Sonic Temple. Now this is the one, again, this follows on beautifully from Electric, going from AC/DC style to slightly more intricate, a little bit more riffy style for Sonic Temple. Again, very stadium rock, heavy rock style album, tinged with a little bit of the original goth in there as well. There's the track listing on the back. Again, a bit difficult to make out. Sun King was the obvious single off the album. I'll hold it like that so you can see. Sun King. Firewoman was a big hit. American Horse, I love that track. Edie Chow Baby was, again, another big hit. I think MTV made that pretty big as well. Sweet Soul Sister, Soul Asylum, New York City, which has actually got Iggy Pop singing on it as well. Automatic Blues, Soldier Blue, Wake Up Time for Freedom. This is another absolutely classic album. These 3 Cult albums from from 85, 87, 89 were the Cult at their absolute peak. Now, I've got a lot of the stuff that came out after this, but for me, they never really reached these heights ever again. In a cover, the original 3 members of the Cult that were still remaining. Eric Singer of Kiss actually played drums on this, although eventually he didn't play on the final, but he certainly played in the demos in the first place. The album cover, the album label. There we are. Nothing particularly interesting. The album's a little bit, the album packaging's a little bit disappointing, to be honest with you, but I do like it to gatefold sleeve, especially with my classic albums. In 2019, this was re-released as a double album in a gatefold Super Deluxe. I've not actually seen it in the wild, so I've not been able to hunt it down yet, but certainly something I'd like to add to my collection. That actually concludes the C section for my record collection. As I said to you at the beginning, it's not a very big section. C, obviously not a letter that I'm particularly attracted to, generally speaking, apart from that, which has got nothing to do with that other C, that, you know, and not that one, not the really big one, but the, you know, the quite big one at the moment, the current popular C, not that. Anyway, what can I say for now? We're moving on to D fairly presciently. D is going to be quite a big section, not least of which we've got Dream Theater in there, which is going to take up a fair bit of my time, no doubt. But look, in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed that. It was a quicker episode, a little slightly different style, that one, but any comments and thoughts, welcome in the comments downstairs. Please subscribe and like if indeed you did, and if you didn't, just tell me why and I'll see what we can do. So in the meantime, stay grumpy, keep on rocking, take care, see you soon.